All right, thank you for coming. So far, yesterday during this conference, we've been talking about miracles, and I believe we could classify those miracles that we've discussed so far again into three categories. So the first one would be manifestations of God's love and presence in our life, usually in response to our prayers. The second category, I think, would be the category that has unique signs that God gives us to strengthen our faith. These might be Eucharistic miracles or stigmata of the saints and so forth. And then the third category, special ways in which God simply conveys, not simply, conveys his message to us. Let's say miraculous apparitions. There may be more categories, but I'm just trying to somehow summarize what has been discussed so far. My point would be this: that they are not none of those miracles under those categories is necessary from the point of view of nature for the regular functioning of created reality, including human beings. More than this, none of them was necessary for the universe to arrive at the present point of its development, crossing major thresholds of the growing complexity of matter. Now, there is the claim among some scholars today that to those classes of miracles, there needs to be added yet another kind of miracles, which would include some transitions or will refer to some transitions and changes in the already existing universe that allegedly require or required in the past special divine action or miracles to occur. And I believe there are three types of situations or transitions that are here brought into our attention. The first crucial one is the transition from no life to life. And a special divine action and a miracle would be a response here either to the physical cosmological argument from the fine tuning. So we would have God with his special direct miraculous intervention at the beginning, setting up all the physical constants, or a response to the question about the later on transition from biogeochemical structures to life. The second point would be to go more broadly than this and claim that, well, not only the origin of life, but major transitions in the history of life. So, for example, from plants to animals, from lower to higher classes of animals, and from animals to humans, or even the origin of every natural kind of living things requires a special divine action or a miracle. And then the broadest approach or argument that is being made, I believe, by followers of the intelligent design movement is that emergence of first instantiations of all phenomena classified as irreducible or specified complexity requires special divine action or a miracle. So I will address the first 2 points because I will not have time to address all three of them. And I will concentrate specifically on the Aristotelian Thomistic context from which I come and arguments in favor of points or categories 1 and 2 coming or being offered within this school of thought. But before I will move to those arguments, some clarification in terms of terminology. We have seen yesterday how difficult it is to define miracles. Here is my proposition, which follows the Divine Action Project taxonomies that were developed there that the Dr. Or Professor Simon Kopf has in his book. He has summarized this conversation in a very accessible way. So I'm based on what Professor Kopf says, but I also introduce maybe slight little tiny changes here. So first, general divine action, I will define it as and divine action expressed in creation and conservation of the universe, as well as regular divine governance of things, governatio divina, through secondary and instrumental causes. Then special divine action I would define it as a divine act that goes beyond what is defined as general divine action, and is either, once again, it was mentioned yesterday, epistemologically, functionally, or causally special. Where those definitions are provided here, epistemologically special for human beings, so something happens for the sake of us and our understanding of God's presence and action, functionally special in terms of God bringing about his particular divine purpose in nature. And what is most important for us here is causally special. These are means that a particular event that pertains to nature was brought by a particular and unique instantiation of divine agency working through secondary and instrumental causes, special divine action, or apart from causal efficacy, that would be miraculously. So, similar to Professor Kopf, I define miracles as non-coextensive subset of special divine action, where this divine action goes beyond general divine action, is causally special, that is the way in which God efficiently brings about a particular event that pertains to nature, and he does that. And I'm based here on Aquinas, and I claim that he does that either through restraining secondary causes from their natural effects, producing natural effects in the unmediated way, without secondary or instrumental causality of creatures, producing natural effects through particular and unique instrumentality of angels and saints, living and deceased, or producing effects that go beyond the power of nature, such as beatitude. Aquinas would say, at least at one point, that beatitude is falls under miraculous divine interventions. And the last point of this definition or proposition in this definition, these effects should be distinguishable for us who deal with nature. Okay, so having those definitions in mind, let's now move to the origin of life. So it is commonly known today that an attempt at providing a generally accepted definition of life and a plausible story that will be approved by the majority of scientists as to how life came into existence is one of the most discussed topics in biology and philosophy of biology. I will not enter into numerous definitions, theories, and so forth, because this is not the subject of my talk. What is interesting for us from a philosophical point of view, that among scientists we would find who work on those issues, we will find those who would simply admit, like Pross does, that despite the profound advances in molecular biology over the past half century, we still do not understand what life is, how it relates to the inanimate world, and how it emerged. Some are even more desperate or critical about this endeavor, like Grissemer, who says, origins of life studies are doomed to idle speculation, unfit for serious scientific investigation, or worse, fit only for an unresolvable confrontation of science with religious beliefs. Now, despite those difficulties that they are aware of and admit, there is a unanimous consensus, but there is a unanimous consensus among scientists that this emergence of life is natural. That it did not require any special divine action. Life has emerged through the spontaneous emergence of simple, unidentified replicating systems, says Pross and Pascal. Stuart Kaufmann, he says, life has emerged in the universe without requiring special intervention from a creator. God is not nature itself creativity enough. What more do we really need of God? He does not necessarily speak entirely against the case of there being God. He rather, I guess, in weird sometimes way, tries to say that everything happens through secondary and instrumental causes. Now, Edward Fazer, in his book from 2019, he comes with a following statement in response to those claims made by scientists, specifically referring to the Aristotelian Thomistic context and school. He says, those writers which I have cited, and these are the authors he cites earlier on, generally take the view that transition from hominins to human beings required direct divine intervention. And he says many of those authors, such as Koren, also hold that the transition from inorganic substances to vegetative life also requires special divine intervention. He doesn't go into details, as Fazer often does. He just makes those bold claims without sometimes substantiating them. But what is important for us here, that there is a new argument that was developed recently in the Thomistic school, supporting precisely this claim. And here is the argumentation that it is based on the distinction that both Aristotle and Aquinas make between transient and immanent causation. So here are the authors that developed this argument. The last name may be less familiar to you. Michael Honhout, he has a PhD in theology from Boston College, and recently he has written an STL thesis here under my supervision, and he developed further the argument that earlier on was proposed by Oderberg, Fazer, and William Carroll. So here is the quotation from Aquinas, who says about those two types of operations, so one that remains in the agent and is a perfection of the agent itself. So that would be this immanent intrinsic causation. And he gives examples after Aristotle: sensing, understanding, and willing. And then another type of agency that passes over into an external thing, like heating, cutting, or building, and that would be the transient causation. David Oderberg builds on this distinction, and here is his argument that was proposed in his paper in 2013. First of all, he says the essence of life is immanent causation. This is, he says, causation that originates with an agent and terminates in that agent for the sake of its self-perfection. It is a kind of teleology, but metaphysically distinctive in what it involves. Already here, I think his language is a bit imprecise, because this is an efficient causation and not teleology. It is efficient causation that is characteristic of a being that has a certain type of teleology proper to it, but he says that it is a kind of teleology. Immanent causation is not just an action for a purpose, but for the agent's own purpose. And now he's aware, and he says Aquinas speaks rather of self-movement as defining life rather than immanent causation, but he means the same thing. Organisms change themselves. Okay, the next step of his argumentation. Immanent causation that defies life can never arise in any way from transient causation. In other words, no amount of transient causation can ever over time give rise to immanent causation. Third, transience and immanence are mutually exclusive. Next, from those two propositions, 2 and 3, it follows that life could not have come about through abiogenesis. And from 4, it follows that the answer to the origin of life puzzle must be theistic. I believe that the tacit assumption here is that an explanation in terms of biogenesis introduces a causal regress. So therefore, you need to have a being that, in some ways, a causal regress, unless you have a being who is God, who is also alive, but obviously life of God, we predicate it in an analogous way. Now, so this is the final claim. If life in the universe began in time, but life appeared sometime after that origin, but not through abiogenesis, then a theistic explanation looks like the only option, but he does not say in his article what he means by theistic option. And here where Michael Honhout enters with his argument, where he explains what should be meant by that. At least this is his proposition. No, so he says this: there is an ontological leap and discontinuity between non-living and living creatures, analogical to the ontological leap and discontinuity between lower hominins and human beings. And he obviously here accepts the argument from immanent causation. So he goes to John Paul II and his famous and important address to a conference organized here in Rome in the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, where Pope says that there's with men we find ourselves facing a different ontological order, an ontological leap, a great ontological discontinuity. So Honhout says that a direct special divine action at the transition from no life to life is necessary, analogously to the emergence of the first human or first humans. Now, then he adds that this divine action in the origin of life for him is neither miraculous nor mediated by secondary or instrumental causation of creatures. He claims that it is not interventionist as it brings something that is beyond causal, natural causes to produce. So here is how he describes it. Where an ontological discontinuity exists, the need arises for God to act in a special manner, directly and exclusively, not to replace natural causality, but to bring into existence a higher order of natural causes in and through which God subsequently acts as first cause. What he means by that is that those plants then can reproduce themselves. So then he goes further and says Aquinas speaks about creation and justification as unique categories of special divine action that are neither miraculous nor mediated by secondary or instrumental causation of creatures. So it goes beyond special divine action, including miracles. So here's the quotation from Aquinas, who actually does say it. Creation and the justification of unrighteous, though done by God alone, are not, properly speaking, miracles, because they are not of a nature to produce from any other cause, so they do not occur outside the order of nature, since they do not belong to that order. It's a complex argument that probably needs to be unpacked, but I don't have time for that here. Hanhau then says, therefore, that transition from no life to life should be added as yet another member of this class of divine acts. So not only creation and justification of the just, but also transition from no life to life should be added to this class of divine acts that are not miracles, but are also not done through the causation of secondary or instrumental causes. So here is my critical evaluation of this argument. And now at this moment, I realized that I didn't change my presentation. I wanted to add one more slide, which I don't have it here. So maybe I will try to describe it from memory. So the first critical question that is being asked here is this. Is immanent causation defining life? So there is a number of neo-scholastic thinkers who actually do say so, and Oderberg refers to them. But Mary George recently has written a book that I happen to have reviewed for CUA Press. Hopefully it will be published. And she brings an argument against Oderberg and Faeser, saying that immanent causation does not defy life. And there is a reason why Aristotle, when defining immanent causation, refers to intellection, willing, and sensing, because these are actions that are perfections of themselves and in themselves. So it's not part of an organism doing something else to something to another part of organism. This is an action that perfects is an end in itself. And she says that vegetation, which is proper for plants, is not like this, because and animals as well, but nutrition, which is a vegetative power proper for plants and also animals. Here she says there is a part of organism doing something that then benefits and is transported to other parts of an organism, and therefore it is not, strictly speaking, an immanent causation. In fact, this is an argument that was brought earlier on by Eve Simon in the first half of the 20th century, and it goes back to John of St. Thomas from 17th century. They bring this argument against the claim that immanent causation defies life, and they claim that self-motion defies life and not immanent causation. So there are those who. So the conversation is complex, and there are those who support the argument and those who are opposed to the claim that immanent causation defies life. So the claim would be that immanent causation is proper for higher acts or dispositions or agencies of organisms that are present only in animals and human beings. But there are those who claim that, well, we can distinguish between immanent causation per se, which would be an action that is an end in and of itself, and a lower type of or grade of immanent causation, which would be the case where action simply remains in one and the same object. Okay, and they bring this argument against Mary George. They would bring it against her, saying that she is exaggerating, and with those grades of immanent causation, we could still keep immanent causation as defining life. The second question that is should be brought, or aspect of this conversation brought to our attention, is therefore the question. So even if we would like to say that immanent causation defies life, if we agree with that, let's say, the other question would be: is immanent causation restricted only to living beings? So it may defy life, define life, but maybe at least in some rudimentary way, it is present in non-living creatures. So one of the participants of this conversation on the nature of immanent causation and whether it defies life, Juan Eduardo Carreño, he actually says that immanent causation comes in degrees. And he refers here to Koren, who says something like this in reference to what I've said a minute ago. In action, an action will be immanent in the strict sense if it perfects the power itself from which it emanates, right? And immanent in a wider sense when it simply remains in one and the same object. So he says the vegetative life, the functions of vegetative life are immanent only in the wider sense. A vegetative life may be called transient in the sense that it does not remain in the power from which it emanates, and also immanent in the sense that it does remain at least in the supposite whose action it is. And having said this, so I went and read more from Koren, and I discovered that he actually, having said what he said before, that it comes in grades, he asks, well, does immanent causation is present in maybe in non-living bodies, like a rubber ball that's squeezed comes back to its original shape? And he says, it could be called immanent, such movement, but it's not immanent in the technical sense of the term. Fine, but still, later on, we have Don Seal, who refers to intra-atomic movements of inorganic matter. So again, he says, well, there's lots of action going on that keeps to be oriented towards keeping material things that are inanimate in a given stage, shape, and so forth. So he says, why should we not call this immanent activity? Well, he says, in a certain sense, we could say that it is, or at least that in some approximation to it, something analogous to it. At the same time, there's a difference here, and a crucial difference. These movements only maintain the energy of the atom, but they do not perfect the atom such that it develops in some way or the other. Nevertheless, I think that what they are trying, or what they actually say here, enables us to claim or to predicate an approximation to, or even an actual presence of a rudimentary expression of immanent agency in inanimate matter. One that is not clearly perfective of substances at the lower levels of complexity of matter, but can be classified still as immanent agency in a wider sense of the term. It would be predicated of phenomena at the lower levels of complexity of matter, and when predicated about them, it differs significantly from immanent causation observed in animal things, and yet we still could, I believe, predicate it about in reference to configuration and reconfigurations of inanimate substances in changed extrinsic conditions. I claim that it could be treated in terms of elementary expressions of immanent agency. The fact that the external impact is oftentimes necessary in case of such phenomena is not detrimental to the argument that they show some traces of immanent causation, because in terms of living beings, also the external impact is important and necessary for them to exercise their immanent causation. Okay, so a similar argument, I think, flows from a more contemporary non-reductionist ontology for the scientific age, which is offered in theory of emergence. Those who work within this theory, they claim that there are levels of dynamic operations and dynamic phenomena that are interrelated at various stages of complexity of nature. So one account speaks about homeodynamics, then morphodynamics and teleodynamics. So as you have it on the slide, so homeodynamics, higher order properties of stochastic systems, then morphodynamics, more complex dynamical organization of diverse classes of phenomena, which show some spontaneous regularizing tendencies. And then teleodynamics, with here that would be life, with reference to living things that show end-directedness and consequence organization. So the claim is that we can speak about the dynamical depth, a hierarchical complexity of those irreducible dynamical phenomena showing at different levels of complexity of matter, which I believe can be referred to the typology of grades of immanent agency proposed by those contemporary Thomists I mentioned before. So if this is true, then immanence of causation is not a zero-sum game. It can be seen as a characteristic that gradually develops and is already present in its elementary expressions at the level of less and more complex non-living systems. If you are willing to agree with this, then I claim that the origin of life, we could speak in this case about a matrix of non-living agents characterized by their proper transient and immanent powers that can give origin to the first animate entity, which shows a new type of immanent agency. It is indeed a unique self-referential immanent causation in reference to the environment, in relation to environment, directed toward maintaining a delicate homeostasis, and yet its novelty does not mean it cannot be instantiated in a new type of entity brought into existence by a matrix of natural causes acting for a purpose due to the lower level or less robust kind-specific immanent powers. Okay, and then comes the question of divine action. Okay, Aquinas says creation and justification is not miraculous and is yet unmediated. Hornhout says, once again, a third category, transition from no life to life, should be added here. But reading closely what he says in his STL dissertation, I found out that he actually uses the language of creation several times. And I think that he is confused here, and I think that can be seen when we actually analyze what happens in the transition from hominin to human being, where I think what happens there is both general divine action, God working in nature through evolutionary transformations which dispose matter to be actualized by a first human soul. That happens through general divine action and maybe cases of special divine action, and added to it as creation ex nihilo of the first human soul. So this is a very complex operation that takes place here, and divine action is engaged in those various ways. So Hornhout, I think, ignores this fact. And I think that if he wants to have an analogy here, so he would have to admit that both here we have general divine action with maybe special divine action and creation of the first vegetative soul. Then it makes sense, and we truly have an analogy between what happens in transition to human beings and transition to life from no life. The difficulty here would be this, I claim. Human souls are created ex nihilo because they cannot be educed from the potency of matter because of their unique dispositions and their immortality. Nothing immortal can be educed from corruptible matter and nature. Now, with vegetative soul, on his argument, we would have a difficulty here. These are souls that can be educed from the potency of matter, yet the first one of them must be created ex nihilo because nature does not have efficient causes to educe it. I think it goes against, I think, a meaningful or plausible claim where creation ex nihilo happens at the beginning and foundation of the universe, and then only human souls are created again ex nihilo for the reasons I mentioned before. Everything else can be educed from potency of matter because God wants creatures to have agency that is bringing new stuff into existence. So I think that Hornhaut's argument leaves us with a view of nature that is somehow unfinished and unmade, with natural dispositions that God wants to be actualized, yet they cannot be manifested in a natural way. I think this seems to question the perfection of the primordial act of divine creation and the dignity of causes of created things as causal agents. We have numerous passages in Aquinas where he emphasizes that God enjoys and likes to give agency to creatures such that they can actually do things in nature, such that his direct intervention is not needed. A few examples. He says that as to the governance, there are intermediaries of God's providence, not on account of any deficit of his power, but by reason of the abundance of his goodness, so that the dignity of causality is imparted even to creatures. So in this kind of government, says Aquinas, the perfection of God's goodness is communicated in a better way than if he had to intervene directly. And we understand that it doesn't speak against causation of God in any way when we realize that, as he says, God is more especially the cause of every action of secondary and instrumental causes than they are themselves, because he keeps them in existence and acts through them. And one last argument here, Aquinas actually accepts the idea of spontaneous emergence of a plant out of non-living matter. He says that the production of plants from earth into actual existence belongs to the work of propagation. So he requires special divine action in terms of higher animals and human beings, but he doesn't require it for the emergence of plants. Well, you can question his view where he has the action of the sun as being responsible as a higher cause here. And Hornhaut claims that this is an outdated science. If Aquinas lived today, he would have changed his mind. But it's very speculative and such argument. And I think that it's not entirely an outdated science. The claim that the energy of the sun, gravity are causal factors in changes that take place on Earth. Okay, I have to move forward. I'm sorry for running pretty quickly through all this, but I want to shortly address the other claim that is being made here, that we go now beyond the origin of life and special divine action or a miracle is necessary in the case of major evolutionary transitions, as I mentioned, all evolutionary transitions, in all cases of speciation, or all instances of the emergence of new species, assuming that it happens in a non-evolutionary way. So, Fazer considers one as a possible version of the Aristotelian approach to evolution, contrasting what he names it Aristotelian theistic evolutionism and contrasts it with Aristotelian natural evolutionism, which does not require direct divine action. He doesn't take a position in his book on this issue. I believe that the second option is held by day-age creationists who accept evolution, and the third option is supported by anti-evolutionist day-age creationists, progressive creationists, and young Earth creationists. I will not, as you can imagine, go into those camps trying to name who they are and what they think. What I'm interested again is a Thomistic version of this argument, which comes in favor of the third point being made here. All instantiations of emergence of new species require divine action, and it happens outside. This is an anti-evolutionary claim. Michael Haberek from my Polish province, an anti-evolutionary Thomist, and Robert Kuntz and Gage, they claim this. Haberek: generation cannot create new design, the combined working of material causes is not sufficient to produce new species. New natures must come from a higher principle, which is an intellect capable of producing new forms in matter. Kunz and Gage, the semen of one species lacks the natural power to produce a plant or animal of another species, so if a new species appears, it must be immediately coming from a god. Now, the presupposition of those arguments is that the principle of proportionate causation is valid. So whatever perfection exists in effect must be found in its effective cause. No effect exceeds its cause. We have numerous versions of the same argument in the writings of Aristotle and Aquinas. So the claim is a cause cannot give what it does not have, therefore a special divine action is required. By the way, oftentimes they don't specify what they mean by special divine action. So I brought those definitions of miracles and special at the beginning as a set of subset of special divine action, in distinction with comparison to general divine action, trying to like help this conversation, because they actually don't have precise distinctions oftentimes. So this principle, if we wanted to treat it literally today, well, we will have to say that it makes implausible a vast number, if not the majority, of substantial changes that are observed in science, in nature. Because like in so many changes and transformations, reactions and so forth, we see new things coming into existence that have completely different properties than things from which they came. So how to deal with this problem? Here I follow phases. So there are several strategies here to respond to this question, and I treat all of them in my recent book on evolution in the first chapter, last section of the first chapter. I will bring just two arguments from where I follow Phaser in one way or the other, and developing on what he says. So we can refer to the medieval concept of dispositions and properties present in things potentially or virtually and not actually. Okay, so so that would be an answer to the question: what happens with all the atoms that build my body or molecules? So they are virtually present. So their substantial form is in a way lost. For myself to be one substance, and yet they are present by their powers, and they can be received once again when, in some ways, when my organism falls apart. So Phaser says this: whatever is in effect must be in its total cause in some way or the other, whether formally, virtually, or eminently. So he gives the example of $20. So he says you can have it as a bill formally, on a bank account virtually, or you may have an access to a $20 bills printing press, and you will have it eminently. So referring to this distinction, I believe that virtual presence may be here interpreted as extrinsic presence of a given perfection or its aspects or parts in what Phaser calls a total cause of a given entity. Because the awareness, so my claim is that the awareness of evolutionary causal nature, of the complexity of evolutionary transition, where relevant contributors to speciation are incredibly many, and these are changes that happen throughout the extended period of time, is oftentimes lost in the debate. So those who say evolution breaks the law of the principle of proportional causation, they usually take into account the last step of evolutionary transition, and they say, well, we have one type of organism and then we have a different type of organism. How come it is impossible? Well, if we take into account all the biological information that is put into this matrix of causal interactions that happen throughout time and space over this long period of time, I believe that most of this information is lost in different ways. Some of it is kept and translated into changing disposition of primary matter, such that evolutionary transition may eventually occur. So when we think about those higher perfection present in a total cause of speciation, when we think about speciation, once again, we have to take into account numerous causes that contribute to this change. So we have DNA mutations, recombination, gene transfers, and genetic drift in the genetic material that lead to changes in the phenotype or organisms in a given lineage of given species that strive to survive and produce fertile offspring. This falls under the pressure of natural selection in the presence of isolation barriers. And this falls under what we know as modern evolutionary synthesis. Today, we have even more causal agents here. Epigenetic changes, going beyond genetic changes, developmental aspects, cultural, behavioral, and physiological features, ecological conditions, reactions of organisms among themselves and with the environment. All these are treated as channels of inheritance causally engaged in this transition. So this is the extended evolutionary synthesis. And then all this brings speciation and transition to a new species. So already in 1970s, Benedict Ashley says that the proportionate cause of the emergence of new organisms is not a single law of or force, but a concurrence of many causes in an evolutionary event. Therefore, the amount of information it contains in integrated form is no greater than the amount of information present in the historical evolutionary process. And actually, Aquinas has something that supports it. He distinguishes 4 types of efficient causation, among which we find perfecting and preparing causes. So the perfecting cause, you could think about it as the final step of an evolutionary transition. But then we have tons of preparing causes, the causes disposing anything which does not induce the final perfection form, but rather only prepares matter for a given form, says Aquinas. So in response to the claim that a cause cannot give what it does not have, we have this answer that I described so far, and then one more answer, and I will finish with this and have a short conclusion, which refers to what was invoked yesterday, a passive obediential potency or capacity of inanimate and animate things, where a nature of a given cause can be elevated such that it is capable of to give what by nature it does not have. So the eminent presence of perfections in contingent causes goes beyond their natural dispositions, and they are instrumental causes with respect to a higher cause. And this elevation of such of those agents is caused by the supernatural concurrences of the first cause, but they act as secondary and here instrumental causes. So that would be still an example of special divine action that goes in a way beyond general divine action, but it still happens through created organisms. And I believe that, or other causes, that in this way we could say that this speciation can take place. So my conclusion would be that nature does not need miracles for the reasons I've mentioned here. I claim that divine action in transformations of matter, including evolutionary transformations that lead to the emergence of new natural kinds, is expressed in regular divine governance of created reality through secondary and instrumental causes, and possible instantiations of special yet not miraculous divine action, again through secondary and instrumental causes. With the exception of human souls, for the reasons I've mentioned, which are created ex nihilo, all kinds of substantial forms actualizing living beings can be thought as educed from the potency of primary matter by natural efficient causes that contribute to highly complex processes which can be extended in both space and time, but some of them happen instantaneously, obviously. This naturally does not diminish the role and the importance of God once we understand the depth of divine transcendence and immanence in Aquinas' view of the world and its relationship to God, and his strong emphasis on the dignity of created things as causal agents. This is literature if you are interested. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I was probably trying to say too much in a short time, but I hope it was digestible in one way or the other, or to some extent. I don't know. Thank you.